All eyes turned to the dog, a calm, soft-eyed Labrador standing at the edge of the courtroom. The defense attorney laughed, calling it a cheap stunt to win sympathy. But moments later, when the dog did something no one expected, the judge froze, and tears silently rolled down his cheeks. Before I tell you what happened next, can I ask you something small? If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please tap that subscribe button. Most people watch and move on, but your one click could help this message reach someone who really needs it. Courtrooms are meant to be places of order, law, and logic, but sometimes something walks in that doesn't follow the rules. That day, it wasn't a person who changed the case. It wasn't a powerful attorney, a secret witness, or a surprise document. It was a dog, and what that dog did left an entire courtroom in stunned silence. This is the true story of Benny, the Labrador no one took seriously, until he brought a courtroom to its knees. It wasn't supposed to go this far. The judge had seen his fair share of property disputes, angry neighbors shouting over fence lines, tree roots, and driveways, but there was something different about this one from the moment the papers were filed. Lila Morrison had never caused trouble in her life. Everyone in town knew her as Miss Lila, the kind old woman who still baked cookies for the mailman, always had a smile for the garbage collectors, and never missed her Sunday walks with her dog Benny. Her house was old but well kept, with white picket fencing that had turned gray with time and weather. The type of fence you don't just build, you grow up with. You paint it when you're young, and repaint it again when you're old, even if it doesn't really need it. It's the kind of fence that holds memories. And then came Harold Benton, a retired military officer with a thick voice, sharp mustache, and opinions sharper than his jawline. He moved into the house next door nearly 4 years ago, buying it after it sat abandoned for almost a decade. At first, no one minded Harold. He was quiet, distant, but respectful. That changed in his second year, after he began clearing the land, as he called it, trimming overgrown branches, removing rocks, planting tall trees near the border Lila had never touched. Then came the fence. Lila noticed one morning, while watering her garden, that the northern edge of her wooden fence had vanished, 5 panels removed, just gone. No warning, no discussion, no apology, just empty space where memories used to stand. She knocked on Harold's door, politely. She even brought lemon cake, still warm. "Mr. Benton," she had said, as calmly as she could, "I believe there's been a mistake." But Harold didn't see it that way. He opened his door halfway, didn't invite her in, didn't take the cake. "That fence was on my land," he said flatly. "I had it surveyed." Lila blinked. "But that fence has been there for 40 years. Wrong land," Harold interrupted. "I have proof." That single exchange was the beginning. Within 2 weeks, Lila received a letter from Harold's lawyer. He was filing a legal claim to formally redraw the property line. The letter included photographs, maps, even satellite images taken from Google Earth, showing how the land appeared to overlap. Lila didn't know how to respond. She had never hired a lawyer before. She didn't know the difference between a deed and a plat. She only knew where her yard ended because she'd watched Benny run along that same line for more than 10 years. Every single morning, like clockwork, Benny would make his slow trot from the porch to the back corner of the fence, sniff around the same tree stump, then loop back and lie down under the old maple. It was his route, his land, his world. And now, someone was saying it wasn't hers anymore. She sat at her kitchen table that night, Benny asleep at her feet, and just cried. How could someone take away something you had lived with for a lifetime, just because they had paperwork? And the worst part, no one else cared. Her friends told her to just let it go. Her niece in the city offered to help her sell the house and move somewhere quieter. Even the police told her, "It's a civil matter, ma'am." So she did the one thing no one expected. She fought back. Hiring a lawyer took half of her savings. Preparing the case took the other half. Her attorney warned her from the start. Property disputes are tricky, especially when the other party has official records. But Lila wasn't fighting with documents. She was fighting with memories. She brought in photos of her late husband standing by that fence, receipts for paint cans she'd bought over the years to repaint it, even a journal entry where she'd once written about how Benny dug under it when he was a puppy. But the court wanted facts, measurements, coordinates, not feeling. And that's when she brought Benny. The first day she walked into that courtroom with him, people stared, not in a cruel way, just curious. He wasn't barking. He wasn't aggressive. He just walked beside her, calm and alert, as if he understood the importance of where they were. The judge paused. "Miss Morrison, is that necessary?" She replied softly, "He's part of this." The bailiff tried to escort her back out, But before he could, Benny sat right there in the aisle and wouldn't move. Just sat, upright and still, staring at Harold from across the room. Everyone chuckled nervously. Even Harold smirked. Really? A dog in court? His lawyer whispered something about decorum, but the judge, after a long pause, allowed it. Let him stay, as long as he stays quiet. He did, but what he revealed wasn't silence. It was something far more powerful. The arguments began. Harold's lawyer pulled out survey maps, aerial shots, printed legal descriptions that used words Lila didn't even understand. They showed how over the years, due to outdated fencing and neglected borders, a portion of the land had shifted unlawfully. Lila sat there quietly, nodding, waiting. Then it was her turn. Her lawyer asked her to speak. She didn't use legal terms. She didn't point at maps. She just talked about mornings with her husband, drinking coffee by that fence, talked about the hole Benny had once dug to chase a rabbit, talked about the days she planted daisies right at the edge and watched them grow year after year, never once disturbed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just told the truth. And Benny sat there the entire time, unmoving, watching Harold, as if waiting. Then came the moment that changed everything. The defense lawyer, clearly frustrated, said, "Your Honor, this is all emotion. This isn't evidence." Then he added, loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear, "This is just a pathetic attempt to gain sympathy." She even brought a dog to cry on cue. People murmured. The judge leaned back, silent, and that's when Lila said one word, "Duke." Benny's head lifted. He stood, walked straight across the courtroom floor, right up to Harold's bench, and growled, low, deep, not aggressive, but deliberate. Every head turned. Even the court stenographer stopped typing. "Mr. Benton," the judge asked slowly, "do you know that name?" Harold's expression faltered. "Ah, yes. Would you explain?" He looked down. "Duke was my dog. Years ago." Lila nodded. "Benny and Duke used to fight through that fence. Every morning. For 2 years." The judge sat still. "This dog," Lila said softly, "remembers that fence. He remembers who lived behind it. He remembers where his world ended and another began." The judge looked at Benny. The courtroom was frozen in time. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was testimony. Living, breathing, memory-based testimony. And that was something even maps couldn't erase. The courtroom remained still. You could hear the soft shuffle of papers, the slow breathing of people caught in the tension. Benny's eyes locked on Harold, his stance calm but firm, like he was standing guard not just for Lila, but for everything that fence represented. Harold shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He glanced down, then back at Benny, his jaw tightening. No one knew what was going through his mind, but his confident facade seemed to crack. Lila's lawyer took a deep breath and gently asked, "Mr. Benton, why did you start planting trees so close to that fence? Were you trying to claim more land?" Harold hesitated. His lawyer opened his mouth to object, but the judge shook his head slightly, signaling to let the witness answer. I wanted privacy," Harold said finally. "The house is old, the neighborhood's changed. I thought the trees would protect my family from noise and traffic." "That's understandable," the judge said. "But what about the fence?" Harold's voice dropped. "I didn't think it was on our land." The judge's eyes narrowed. "You believe the fence was on your property?" Harold swallowed hard. "Yes." Lila's heart pounded. For years, Harold had been changing the land, planting, digging, building, all while she watched, powerless. And no matter what documents he showed, no paper could explain the memories Benny held. Benny had walked that line every day for over 10 years. He had been the silent witness to every moment on that land. The laughter, the tears, the love. Lila remembered the first day she brought Benny home as a puppy. How he'd stumbled around the yard, chasing butterflies and digging holes along the fence. How he'd protect her family by barking at shadows in the night. To her, Benny was more than a dog. He was the keeper of the land's soul. And today, he was speaking louder than any lawyer. The judge leaned forward in his chair. "Miss Morrison, do you believe Benny's behavior today has proved anything to this court?" Lila looked down at Benny, who wagged his tail gently, eyes shining with loyalty. She smiled, her voice steady. "I believe he remembers what no paper can show, where his home is." A soft murmur ran through the courtroom. Even some of Harold's supporters looked unsure. Then, a witness was called. The local surveyor Harold had hired. The man was precise, technical. His words were full of measurements, GPS coordinates, and legal jargon. According to him, the fence was on Harold's property by nearly 2 feet. The judge nodded. "Thank you, sir." But then, Lila's lawyer stood and asked for one last piece of evidence, something no map or satellite image could give, a testimony from the community. Neighbors who had lived there for decades were brought in one by one. Mrs. Jensen, who lived 3 houses down, recalled, "That fence has stood for as long as I can remember. I grew up here, and it's always been the boundary." Mr. Ramirez, a retired postman, said, "Every day I delivered mail, that fence was a dividing line. I even remember seeing those 2 dogs barking at each other through it." Each voice added weight to Lila's story, the story Benny had been living all along. Still, Harold's lawyer fought back fiercely. "This is anecdotal and sentimental nonsense," he spat. "Property is property, and deeds don't lie." The courtroom tension grew thick, the air heavy with anticipation. The judge looked around, then at Benny again. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, and then Benny stood. Slowly, deliberately, he walked toward the middle of the courtroom floor. He stopped, looked directly at the judge, and laid down. A simple act, but one full of meaning. That moment broke the courtroom silence. The judge removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He spoke softly. "This case is no longer about lines drawn on a map." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "It's about the respect of history, loyalty, and truth." Turning to both parties, he said, "I'm asking you to look beyond papers and measurements, to see the people, and yes, the animals who have called this place home." There were no immediate answers, but something had changed. Outside the courtroom, reporters whispered among themselves. This was the most unusual case they'd ever seen. A dog turned the tide, and Lila, she sat quietly, Benny curled at her feet, waiting for justice to be served. Days passed after that courtroom scene, but the weight of the case lingered heavily in the air, like the stillness after a storm. Lila returned home with Benny, her heart heavy but hopeful. She couldn't stop thinking about what the judge said. Look beyond papers and measurements. But how does someone truly do that? How do you make a judge, a court, a room full of strangers, see what years of memories and quiet loyalty mean? The answer came unexpectedly. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Lila sat on her porch, with Benny by her side. The fence stood tall and quiet, its weathered with glowing gold in the fading light. She gently ran her hand along the rough surface, feeling every groove and nick, every paint chip that told a story. Benny rested his head in her lap. Suddenly, a soft bark broke the silence. It wasn't a warning bark, it was a call. Lila looked up and saw Harold approaching. His face was lined with exhaustion and something else, a weight she hadn't seen before. They hadn't spoken since the court hearing. "Lila," he said quietly, "I've been thinking." She stayed silent, unsure what to expect. Harold sighed. "Maybe this fight, maybe it's not just about land. Maybe we forgot what this place really means." Lila nodded slowly. "It's more than property. It's memories. It's life." Over the next days, Harold and Lila met several times, not as opponents, but as neighbors trying to understand each other. They talked about the fence, how it wasn't just wood and nails, but a marker of shared history. They shared stories about their dogs, Duke and Benny, about how those dogs had fought but also protected the boundaries of their worlds. And slowly, the bitterness began to fade. Back in court, the atmosphere had shifted. The judge called both parties to the stand for a private meeting. No lawyers, no documents, just 2 neighbors, a dog, and a judge willing to listen to something beyond legalese. Harold spoke first. "I'm sorry, Lila, for everything." Lila replied, "We both wanted the same thing, peace." Benny wagged his tail, sensing the change. The judge looked at the 2 with kind eyes. "This case will not be decided by lines on a map," he said firmly. "It will be decided by understanding and respect." He proposed a compromise, a shared property line that respected the fence, the memories, and the loyalty of 2 dogs who guarded it for years. And so, the court's decision wasn't just about land. It was about human connection, about honoring the past, without losing sight of the future. Lila and Harold left the courtroom that day changed. No longer enemies, but neighbors. And Benny, he was the silent hero of that story. Sometimes, the quietest voices speak the loudest truths. Sometimes, a dog's loyalty can remind us all what truly matters. After the court agreed to hear the case, Lila knew the battle wasn't going to be easy. She had never been in a courtroom before, and the thought of facing Harold and his army of lawyers was terrifying. But there was one thing she was sure of. Benny would stand by her side, just like he had for the past 10 years. Benny was no ordinary dog. He was loyal, intuitive, and had a way of sensing things people missed. From the moment Lila rescued him as a tiny, trembling puppy from a rain-soaked alley, the 2 had been inseparable. Lila often said that Benny understood her better than any human ever had. He comforted her on lonely nights, protected her from danger, and was always there to remind her that she wasn't alone. As the case unfolded, more memories came to light, memories that painted a picture no legal document could capture. Lila remembered the day she and her late husband had built the fence themselves, late into the evening, painting it white under the glow of old porch lights. She could still hear the sound of Benny's playful barks as he chased fireflies along the fence line. That fence was a symbol, not just a boundary, but a marker of their life, love, and family. Meanwhile, Harold's story was different. He was a man who had seen the world through the harsh lens of military life. Discipline, order, and structure were everything to him. When he bought the property, he saw numbers, lines, and ownership, not memories. His growing frustration with the fence came from feeling trapped. He wanted a fresh start, privacy for his family, and control over his space. The trees he planted near the fence weren't just for beauty. They were a wall against the past he wished to leave behind. Despite their differences, both Harold and Lila had a connection they didn't expect through their dogs. Harold's dog, Duke, was Benny's rival for years. The two dogs would bark and growl across the fence, their presence a daily reminder of the invisible boundary between their owners. But Duke was gone now, and Benny, with his calm eyes and gentle heart, carried the history of that rivalry and more. In court, Benny became more than just a dog. He was a witness to decades of stories, silent but powerful. When Benny stood and growled at the mention of Duke, the courtroom held its breath. It was as if Benny was saying, "I remember. I was there." That moment shifted the focus from cold facts to something deeper, something only time and loyalty could explain. Lila's neighbors started to share their memories too. Mrs. Jensen, who had lived down the street for 50 years, spoke of children playing along that fence and the dogs chasing each other on summer evenings. Mr. Ramirez, the retired postman, recalled delivering mail while Benny sat patiently by the porch. These voices built a tapestry of community and connection, contrasting sharply with Harold's piles of legal documents. The judge listened quietly to all of it. He seemed to understand that this was not just a legal dispute, but a story of lives intertwined with a place, a fence, and a dog named Benny. The courtroom was packed. Not a single person dared to shift in their seat. The air was thick with anticipation, tension crawling like an invisible thread between every face. Lila sat at the plaintiff's table, clutching the worn leather leash of her dog, Benny, with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from hope. Hope that the years of memories, the countless quiet moments shared with Benny on that land, would finally find their voice. Across the room, Harold Benton sat stiffly, his polished shoes planted firmly on the cold marble floor, his face carefully composed, but eyes flickering with unease. This was not the confident man who had stormed into the courthouse weeks before, confident that deeds and legal jargon would win him this battle. The judge, a man whose expression usually held the gravity of countless difficult cases, now seemed quietly conflicted. His brows furrowed deeply as he surveyed the courtroom, taking in every witness, every piece of evidence, but most of all, the dog lying patiently by Lila's side. The courtroom bailiff called the session to order. The judge cleared his throat. Then he spoke in a voice low and steady, carrying the weight of the moment. "This case," he said, "has taken a turn I did not expect. It has challenged the way we view evidence, testimony, and the meaning of ownership." He looked directly at Benny. "This dog is more than just an animal present here today. He represents years of history, loyalty, and truth that cannot be ignored." The judge's gaze swept over the crowd, meeting eyes full of curiosity and disbelief. "Let us hear from this silent witness one final time." Benny, who had sat motionless throughout the trial, suddenly stood. His golden fur caught the light, filtering through the tall courtroom windows. His deep brown eyes shone with a quiet intelligence. He took a few slow, deliberate steps forward. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Even the murmurs ceased. Every person's eyes were glued to the dog's every move. The slow pace wasn't random, it was purposeful. Benny stopped near the center of the room, standing tall and calm. He looked up, not at Lila, not at Harold, but at the judge. His gaze held a steady, profound honesty. Then, in an act that seemed filled with meaning beyond words, Benny lowered his body and laid down. His head rested gently on his paws. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The judge slowly removed his glasses and rubbed the corner of his eyes, as if holding back emotion. "This," he said, voice soft and thick, "is the purest form of testimony I have ever witnessed." He looked at both Harold and Lila. This is no longer a matter of deeds or legal maps. He took a deep breath. This is about respect for history, for loyalty, for the memories held within this land. Harold shifted in his seat, his usual stern mask cracking just enough to reveal a trace of vulnerability. He looked down at Benny and then back to the judge. In a quiet, almost hesitant voice, he said, "I never expected a dog to remind me of what's truly important." The courtroom hung on his words. No one had expected the retired military man, known for his rigid views, to admit anything other than legal right. Lila's eyes filled with tears. She reached down to gently stroke Benny's head, whispering softly, "Thank you, boy." The judge's voice grew stronger. Legal ownership is important, but so is the human connection to the land we call home. He paused to look around the courtroom. We must consider the lives that grew here, the memories built here, and yes, the silent witnesses who guard those memories every day. His eyes locked with Harold's. "Therefore, I rule in favor of Miss Morrison." The gavel came down with a decisive strike. A collective breath was released. The courtroom seemed to exhale together, some with relief, some with disbelief. Lila smiled through tears. Harold nodded solemnly, accepting the verdict with dignity. Benny, the dog no one expected to matter, wagged his tail gently. He had spoken without words. He had carried the weight of the past and changed the course of the future. But the story did not end there. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashing. The story was extraordinary. A dog had influenced a legal decision. Some called it a miracle. Others called it justice. Lila, holding Benny close, spoke to the gathered press. "This is more than a victory for me," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "It's a reminder that sometimes the quietest voices speak the loudest truths." The neighborhood, too, felt the impact. Neighbors who had watched the dispute unfold whispered of the courage and loyalty of a dog who refused to be ignored. The fence, once just wood and nails, became a symbol of community and respect. In the weeks that followed, Harold and Lila began to talk, really talk. Old resentments softened. They found common ground in shared memories, in the dogs who had defined the boundary. Benny's role became clear, not just as a pet, but as a keeper of stories, a guardian of history, a silent witness to love, loss, and the power of loyalty. And in the end, the fence wasn't just a boundary between two properties. It was a bridge between two lives. What started as a simple dispute over a fence turned into something much deeper, a story about memories, respect, and the invisible bonds that tie us to the places we call home. Lila's love for her land, her history with Benny, and her courage to stand up for what she believed in touched everyone who witnessed the trial. Harold, too, learned that sometimes it takes more than legal papers to see the truth. It takes listening to the quiet voices, the ones without words. And Benny, the gentle Labrador, showed the world that loyalty and love can speak louder than any courtroom argument. In the end, the fence wasn't just about property lines. It was about honoring a life lived, a promise kept, and the power of compassion. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more amazing pet stories that touch the heart.